Singapore is taking bold new steps on parental leave, implementing key changes in 2 phases. From April next year, paternity leave of 4 weeks will become mandatory. Parents can also take 6 weeks of parental leave shared between them. Now, this goes up to 10 weeks of shared leave for parents of newborns from April 2026. In the studio today for a discussion on the impact of these moves, we have Minister Indrani Raja, who oversees the National Population and Talent Division at the Prime Minister's Office, and Dr. Xander Ong, CEO of the Centre for Fathering. Welcome to the studio, Minister and Dr. Ong. Minister, let's start with you. Your team consulted businesses and unions ahead of all of these changes. What were some of the concerns raised, and do these new provisions address them sufficiently?
Well, I should start off by saying that all of them understood why we want to have this provision, and they supported the idea of having more parental leave. But from an employer perspective, especially the SMEs, their concern was, will I be able to get the manpower to cover? Will I be able to make sure that my business can continue going? Because for the larger companies, they were generally all right because they have HR departments and they have enough staff to be able to cover. But for a smaller outfit, where let's say you have only 4 employees, if one person is out for a while, that's about 25% of your workforce. So after hearing from them and taking on board their feedback, we did a few things. One was making sure, obviously, that it's government paid paternity leave, government paid shared parental leave. So that frees up the salary that they would otherwise have had to pay. And that allows them to use this to hire alternative staff, or if somebody else who's already employed is covering, to pay that person more. So having that extra cash at the disposal helps. That's one. The second thing they asked was, can it be implemented in phases? Because to be able to do it straight away in one big jump, 10 weeks, is difficult for them, especially those that have smaller companies. And they asked for it to be phased in. They also asked if there could be a gap between the time that we say we're going to do it and the time it's actually done, implementation, to give them time to put in place arrangements and adjustments.
These concerns are valid, right, Minister? And we were talking about 30 weeks of mandatory parental leave in total. How can employers really manage the operational challenges? Earlier you talked about the small and medium businesses where, some of the roles, they are a little bit more specialized and can only be carried out by perhaps 1 or 2 people.
So the key for this to work well is actually to have a good working relationship between the employees and the employers. We have put in provisions that the employees should give early notice, at least 4 weeks, but we would encourage employees to give advance notice even earlier, because if the employer knows well in advance, then you can make arrangements, alternative arrangements and adjustments. So the key is that responsibility, that sense of mutual trust, and understanding that we're both trying to work together to achieve a good outcome. And having an early heads up really makes a difference. And for employees to make sure that before you go on leave, hand over properly, make sure that you brief the person who's taking over. Work with your employer to work out what the covering arrangements will be. And then for the employer also to explain what their concerns are, and you try and work it out together.
A lot of these new measures are also basically to encourage fathers to be more involved, isn't it, Dr. Ong? But if you look at the current measures of paternity leave, 2 weeks mandatory and 2 weeks voluntary, and the take-up rate currently is at about 50% or so. That's basically 1 in 2 working dads. What does this tell us about how much dads really want to be involved in this?
So dads today actually really want to be involved. Increasingly, a lot of them actually know the importance of their roles, even in these beginning months of their child's life. But many of them face this negative perception regarding taking of paternity leave. Because they fear repercussions on their career prospects. They fear not being seen as a good team member. And something that increasingly I keep hearing fathers share that with me.
Minister, all of these changes are also aimed at helping to raise Singapore's total fertility rate, or TFR, which has gone below 1 to 0.97. How hopeful are you that all of these changes will help to move that needle?
Well, I think that these measures have to be seen in the context of the totality of measures that we are taking. We recognize that the decision of whether or not to have a child is a very personal choice, right?
Yeah.
But what we want to do is create an environment, the conditions in a society where parents feel that, hey, you know, I'm really supported if I have a child. So this addresses one piece of feedback which we consistently heard. Parents were worried about the balancing of work commitments as well as time for their children. And they were saying in the first 18 months, that's the time that they really need to bond with the child. So this addresses the infant stage when the child is a newborn. But then don't forget the measures that we have done in the last couple of years, increasing the baby bonus cash gift. We have enhanced the child development account, increased the number of preschool childcare places, lowered the fee caps for childcare fees. MSF is looking at increasing infant care places and currently looking at a pilot for childminders for infants. And then we've had measures on the housing side as well, giving priority to married couples and couples with young children, and also increasing the number of PPHS, the Provisional Parenthood Housing Scheme, and the PPHS open market voucher. So it's a whole slew of things.
Sure. And how soon, though, are you hoping to see a satisfactory number of babies in the pool?
I won't be able to give you an exact date, but I can tell you what I hope. And my hope is as soon as possible.
Sure. Okay. Well, let's hope it will come to fruition. Dr. Ong, you know, with shared parental leave of 10 weeks, there is a chance that perhaps mothers will be taking the bulk of that leave. How much of a mindset shift is needed to change this idea that raising a child is a mother's primary care job?
I think the mindset shift needs to happen both in the workplace and in the family. So workplaces really have to embrace that they form part of the village to support the raising of a child. I think that mindset shift have to happen. So today, Center for Fathering has actually launched our third edition of the Great Companies for Dad Award to really encourage workplaces to be more father-friendly. Because we understand that fathers actually really want to raise their families well, but at the same time have that constraint and tension with doing their marriage and to be there for their children. They want to manage both really, really well. But we also believe that if they are supported, not just are they able to raise the next generation, they're also able to have sustainable productivity. I think that's a win for everyone, whereby companies see a longer term as to how employees can contribute productively in the long term rather than a short-term view. So that's what we hope to work together with companies to be able to foster such a workplace culture in Singapore that we see families really thrive, that children are really happy and they're really supported by both the moms and the dads.
Minister, how do you see this mindset reset playing out over the next decade, from this prevailing perception of mothers being the primary caregivers to really sort of embracing this idea that parents can and should share the burden more equally?
I think we shouldn't underestimate the significance of this step, because what PM has done in his National Day rally announcement with this is we're really signaling that we want to make a societal shift. We want to move from a society where child raising is primarily seen as the mother's responsibility and the father is not really involved in this, to a society where it's a shared responsibility. And as a society, all of us see this as something which is good. And the studies show this too. The studies show that when a father is involved in the child's upbringing from an early stage, the child really benefits emotionally in terms of, bonding with the father as well. The child's outcomes in later life are actually, there's a direct correlation with the father's involvement at an early stage, which is not surprising if you think about it, because the child grows up knowing that the child's loved and cared for by both parents. So I would say to the employers who worry about this, that actually the workplace and the workforce have changed. And given that this is important to young employees, then having family-friendly practices is a key part of talent recruitment and retention. Any company that wants to get ahead and have a good, solid workforce would need to have progressive workplace practices, and that includes all these things that make Singapore a place that's made for families.
Before we go, Dr. Ong, this societal shift that Minister was talking about, especially for couples who are holding back from starting a family, fearing that, out of fear that their career will be affected, what more can we do or to help couples really take that leap and strike that work-life balance?
So I was alluding to the common saying that it takes a village to raise a child. And with Singapore being an aging population, grandparents are retiring later. There are smaller families. So the village has really shrunk. And therefore, parents nowadays face a lot of stress in raising their children. And so I argue that workplaces is part of this village, and we really need them to see it as such in order to change the culture. Because my vision is such that we're able to see a Singapore where more of us are able to see co-workers also as sons, daughters, mothers, and fathers, and support them in these fundamental roles. Because these are roles that are critical and irreplaceable. If more of us see it as such, we're truly able to build a nation that is made for families. And that is something that is my goal, and it's also what many families are hoping can happen to Singapore.
All right, great. Dr. Ong, Minister, thank you very much for coming in to speak with us. That was Ms. Indrani Raja, Minister in the Prime Minister's Office, and Dr. Xander Ong, CEO of the Centre for Fathering.